When you're working with small vendors as well, it's also important to note, you can require them to carry insurance. And I know one of the points that may come up is, hey, if we're a relatively new company, we may not have our security standards up to snuff yet. Isn't that going to make it difficult to get insurance? My argument there would be actually absolutely not.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to ClaimTalk. My name is Danielle Young, and I am the host of the ClaimTalk podcast, sometimes including today. And a statistic that I recently heard internally here at ClaimTalk is that we get about 10,000 emails a day, and approximately a third of them are malicious or bad. And when I heard about that, it completely changed my perspective on how cybersecurity has become such an important and urgent topic in not only our organization, but in the space proper. So I have two fantastic guests with us today that are going to help shed some light, bring expertise, and hopefully some applicable information that you can take back to your organization, share with your own CTO or your own IT team, and see what we can do together to work proactively to work against these bad actors. So first, I want to have these gentlemen introduce themselves. Jeremy.
Hello, I'm Jeremy Schuller, CIO of ClaimTalk.
And I'm Andrew Smith. I am a cyber liability and technology errors and omissions broker with Gallagher.
Yeah, so to go ahead and kick it off here with us, why don't you explain to us a little bit, Andrew, what errors and omissions involves as it pertains to cybersecurity?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's really two buckets, right? There's the cyber and then there's the tech E&O. So the cyber is really covering data loss. It could be equipment breaking due to a cyber attack or, a failure. It could be loss of, net profit due to a cyber attack or a system failure. But the tech E&O is a little bit different. It's really contract driven. So it's really covering you for financial loss and legal costs associated with a lawsuit that's alleging a error in omission in your technology product or service. So, for example, right, if we had a healthcare company, that's in charge of dealing with data, right, inputting data, and that data is input incorrectly. And then that ultimately leads to patients being treated incorrectly due to that, incorrect information being put in. Any lawsuits that arise due to the maybe incorrect treatment, wrongful input of the information would be a tech E&O related claim, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I didn't realize it reached that far, honestly, that a tech E&O claim could go as far as getting into the treatment arm of what healthcare providers are doing.
Well, right. Think about if they put in the wrong information on accident and then healthcare providers are relying on that information, shared across. Maybe somebody switched to a different provider, something like that. I think we also saw it with CrowdStrike as well. They're a large security company that unfortunately pushed out a bad update, which in turn led to thousands of companies being down for, in some cases, multiple days. I think Delta Airlines said that they had lost $500 million due to this downtime. And so it was a simple error, right, in an update, but it did cause a lot of financial loss to others who relied on the software. And that's where the real errors and omissions come into play.
Oh, yeah. I bet the early fathers and mothers and fathers of errors and omissions had no idea that 500 million was ever in their future. I do want to back up a little bit, though, and talk about each of your experiences in the IT cybersecurity space, that we get a little better context and understanding for your historical background. Do you want to go ahead and give us a little bit about you and what you do on a day-to-day?
Yeah, absolutely. So, from an IT and cybersecurity perspective, right, my ultimate goal is to find the right insurance for my client. And what that means is if I'm trying to find the best cyber insurance for a client, I need to be aware of what their cybersecurity posture is, right? What protections are they using? And I leverage that information to go to other carriers in the market to try to find the best terms and conditions for my client at the best price. And so that does require me to have a decent understanding of what are the best security tools in the industry, what are the best practices, because at the end of the day, the carriers do see a lot of loss. And so they're able to tie what cybersecurity controls make the most sense to mitigate potential losses going forward.
So that's what you're doing on a day-to-day basis, is trying to help clients and carrier partners come together with a common understanding of the risk on their cybersecurity and their potential E&O liability.
Absolutely correct.
Yeah. Jeremy, tell us about what you do on the day-to-day. And I would love some of your historical context, because you have quite a background.
I've got 30 years in the IT environment, but with ClaimTalk, it's really kind of a dual mandate of enabling the business, which is a variety of things, but also secure the business and protecting it. But you've got to do so in a way that is prudent and not stifling. And so that's where really the artistry comes in terms of the staff, the skill, the prioritization, the products you choose, the technology, and the partners you choose are all critical components that you mix in the blender and to perceive those good outcomes and get those things going.
Yeah, I like how you just spoke about balancing prudence with, what was the term you used? You said you want to be prudent, but you want to make sure that it's not stifling. I appreciate how you said that because I also work in business development, aka sales, here at ClaimTalk. And when you talk about prudent but not stifling, I know the sales team might be perhaps the last to adopt some of the cybersecurity measures that you put in here. Do you think that's true?
Sometimes it's very fluid. It's based on kind of risk is how I'll prioritize which audiences are first. Sales folks are unique in how they work remote and the interactions they have with brokers and the community from a sales standpoint. And so really try to tailor where we can the risk mitigations to the profile.
Okay. Yeah. So perhaps you might start with the people handling the most sensitive data on the most regular basis and then kind of codify from there, go from there to figure that out.
Yep.
Interesting. Okay, so I want to pivot quickly and talk about the different types of ways we're seeing the bad guys get in because they're changing rapidly. We were discussing this a little bit before we came on the podcast about the different ways that the bad actors are starting to permeate layers. As I mentioned, we're seeing it 1 out of 3 times when someone emails our organization, they're probably a bad guy, bad actor. What types of methods are we seeing start to become more prevalent or more popular, and maybe which ones are we seeing start to fall off?
I think social engineering is going to be very pivotal going forward, given how AI has started to impact it. So back in the day, we would see a phishing email come in. Hey, you're a prince. Send me $10,000 and we'll get you your crown, right? It would have broken English included, and you could tell it was likely a scam. Nowadays, these threat actors are leveraging AI to extents I never thought possible even 5 years ago. There was a recent example of them leveraging deepfake technology where it was a company in Hong Kong, I believe. The threat actors deepfaked their face and voice of the board directors and other, senior professionals and tricked somebody to sending $25 million. Because again, they jump on this meeting and think, I'm seeing all my executive leaders. They want me to send this out very quickly. So we've seen some of that come into play. We've also seen a lot of vishing, which is voice phishing, where they'll collect your voice and a lot of times end up calling an IT help desk and trying to reset their password by pretending to be somebody else that's not their actual voice. And so, think if they got Jeremy's credentials here and were able to reset his information. He really has the keys to the kingdom. And I think these advancements in AI and how threat actors are using them to commit social engineering attacks is only going to continue to grow in the near future.
Yeah. Does that mean that you have to scan your entire body to get in the building? Yep. They do like 3 different layers of biometrics just to get you down into your office. I want to go back and define a couple of terms. Can you define social engineering and deepfake for our audience who might not have a topical understanding of what those mean?
Sure. Yeah. So when we're looking at social engineering, it's almost tricking someone into doing something, right? So in a way, if I'm trying to social engineer somebody to do something that I want, I may lie, I may pretend to be somebody that I'm not in order to get them to do something or divulge certain information. From a deep fake perspective, I think those on social media may be familiar. You can change your own face into somebody else's, right? John Farley, our director of cyber at Gallagher, actually did an entire webinar on this where he turned into Jim Carrey, he turned into all these different celebrities, but these threat actors are leveraging this to pretend to be individuals in an organization, typically with higher credentials, so that they can gain the deepest access to the network as quickly as possible.
What kind of things are you seeing in terms of like new trends or new things that are being tried on us here at ClaimTalk?
Well, we've seen some of the voice phishing as well. I think a key part of all of this is it's a numbers game. They only have to get, right or get in a few times to get a payday. And they are always evolving and learning and using automation and staff and folks that are outside the U.S. And so the value from U.S. dollars is pretty high premium to them in terms of what they can do with it once they get that money. So let's say something non-work related, your Facebook account gets hacked. Well, they scan all of that and they map out your entire life and friends, and that's not gone. And they'll use that later on, or they'll sell it on the black market. And so there's different squads of threat actors that are collecting information and selling it upstream to the bigger fishermen, so to speak, and so they can go forward and get the whales later on, but continually evolving. So like on voice phishing, even though we are not seeing a lot in the past resets, but we are seeing some where people have tried to come in and impersonate for learning our phone system and the call tree for routing and how like those types of things they're learning, and then they're adapting and they're learning their models. And so maybe their goal is maybe not necessarily to get all the way into ClaimTalk, but they're training their methods and their processes. And we're just a journey in their process to graduation, so to speak. And that's the thing that I think's kind of scary, is that they only have to get right a few times. And so from a defense standpoint, you've got to enable the business. And so it's really about prioritizing where you remediate, where you block and tackle. And the ways that you go about that are really key, because you can, again, stifle the business, which we don't want to do. But also we want to make sure we protect things. And so for me, that's really key, to partner with the executive team and make sure that we're on the same page for the choices that we make in terms of whether it be funding, tooling, products, or really when we start to get more intrusive in the business side, make sure we're on the same page for the value we perceive for some choices that we make, and then the data that we have going on, so they're informed on the risks as well.
Going back to what Jeremy was just talking about in terms of, making sure the executive team is informed, that type of thing. I was doing some reading before our session today, and I read that one of the major exposures is that you occasionally have executives, business owners, people at the top who don't maybe fully understand the risk and how it's building underneath them, perhaps because they imagine IT as they did even 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Do you run into that often with your client set, and how do you kind of mitigate that? I mean, how do you make someone understand who doesn't understand the water's rising?
No, that's a great question. It can be really difficult. I think one of the unfortunate realities that I've seen is that sometimes it requires a tough incident to occur to change people's minds. And my hope is that, and at least when I'm trying to sell, I like to use examples, because if you can say, hey, Delta lost $500 million due to it wasn't even a cyber attack, but just a simple outage of a vendor. This can be very meaningful. I think it's important that you work on who you're messaging to. For the folks that, let's take a CFO, for example, that is going to be much more focused on the financials. If you can say, implementing these key cybersecurity controls relate to an ROI of XYZ, I think that's a way that you can approach it, but it's all about knowing your audience. And I think, just simply talking about some of this stuff, some of the new trends and themes going on, like some of the social engineering we talked about, and those all in, I think are ways that you can help them learn more and more. But again, I only see these types of attacks growing in the future as we just become more digitized. So I do firmly believe that going forward, cybersecurity is only going to become more important and more prevalent in everybody's day-to-day lives, not just in IT.
Yeah, my stepson just graduated from Indiana University, and his
Congrats.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and his girlfriend, who also just graduated, is going into cybersecurity sales, because she told me, well, I just hear this is going to be booming, and in 10 years, I'm just going to have one heck of a career. And so I decided I'm going to get into cybersecurity. And I thought, I was so impressed with her foresight, first of all, because I wasn't thinking like that at 22 years old. But second of all, I think I didn't quite have a full grasp and understanding of how big the industry is about to become, especially as remote workforce continues to grow, and as decision makers continue to get maybe farther and farther away from reality about how technology actually works. So I wanted to pivot into our next topic of conversation, which is around how making sure your vendor partners have the same cybersecurity protocols, the same attitude about cybersecurity as you do, or close enough to be acceptable. Mm-hmm. And so here at ClaimTalk, we often partner with partnership vendors, whether it's care coordination, advocacy, most commonly third-party administrators. So I wanted to kick it to you, Jeremy, to give us a little bit of a download about what does it mean to partner with a vendor from an IT cybersecurity standpoint? What do we need to be asking? What kind of questions do we not ask? And you can speak internally or externally, however you see fit.
Sure. First thing that's interesting there is sometimes those vendor relationships are not ones that we always choose. Sometimes in part of the sales process, the customer already has a partnership with a vendor, and they're kind of coming together as part of the marriage, so to speak. And we need to understand that up front, and we do our assessment. And certainly we're focused on cybersecurity and risk, but also there's just more broadly a risk assessment that we are involved in, because the risk could be, cybersecurity certainly, but like an example of Delta Airlines example, there's other business risks that could be incurring from the supply chain that we should be keen to look for and understand as we're asking the questions. And so a lot of it starts with understanding both the client's risk profile and also the partners in terms of where are they at in getting third-party audit certification paper, if they have it, if they don't. If they don't, then there's a whole bunch of other questions we can follow up on to get a sense for where they are in their journey. And it's kind of like baking a cake. There's different degrees. It's a spectrum. And we can understand that a little better through a conversation and getting the details and helping them through that.
When you say risk profile, can you go into a little bit more about what that means? When we're looking at a potential partner or a client's risk profile, are we saying, this guy has one computer out in the woods that he never updates over here, and then over here is Google? I mean, what do we mean by risk profile?
I think it kind of starts with understanding what their tolerance expectations are. Some folks will talk about being like zero tolerance of any risk. Well, then that feels like it's very much the other end of the spectrum where they're going to be accepting some impediments to business processes and some friction here and there. But generally, that's not very common in the business cycle because that's more like Department of Defense, government agencies. So you're sliding somewhere down from there. And this is kind of the conversation that we have really inferring from the business as we go and collect, because it's really a case where you can ask the client, well, what is your profile? And they're going to come back with like, here's my secret handshake kind of thing. So through the conversation about the integration, we'll understand, how timely are they in, say, processing medical claims. All these other kind of aspects really speak to the way that the business is constructed and operationalized and the kind of automation that they perhaps have. And it all comes together to convey an image of how they work. And through that, and then the other cyber risk questions, we can understand what gaps we perceive and have follow-up questions.
So I wanted to circle back too with you about third-party administrators, because that is, I think, the most commonly under-investigated cyber relationship that we make with people. Again, to go back to your comment about the sales cycle, typically in the sales cycle for our salespeople, we are relying on the broker and their preferences, or we're making recommendations based on our preferences internally here. But can you speak a little bit to the cybersecurity concerns with TPAs specifically that we've run into?
Sure. Late last year, we had, in this case, it was a broker and a TPA combined, the agency was.
Interesting.
And we received some malicious email content from them and responded. We did our incident response remediation and cleaned it up and responded to them, let them know. They said they did their job as well. And then we got more shortly thereafter. And in that scenario, it was more complex. Probably lots of people in that user's mailbox, the contact list got messages similar to us. That would take them to a website that would have been hijacked in Australia that had a proxy to another website, which then got to some content downloaded and tried to get credentials stolen from the device, which is pretty common from a phishing standpoint. Our software and security stuff blocked it, even though and so we were fine ultimately, but it's still a cyber incident and concern. And that's a unique scenario where I kind of talked about, and especially with the executive team, of we made the decision to block all emails from that vendor, from that TPA, until we received a more thorough assessment from them that their cybersecurity incident had been resolved with a kind of a story around what happened and signature sign off from somebody from their executive team that has that assigning authority. As a kind of another layer of stepping up and understanding that, okay, for realsies, is it actually fixed this time?
Yeah. And that wasn't necessarily the client's choice at all, because they probably didn't raise their hand and say, I want to work with this combined TPA broker.
I don't know for sure on how that partnership came together, but we did let the client know at the time, like, hey, this is what's happening. There's some concerns. We try to be a little bit respectful for the relationship there as well. And the privacy too. Yeah.
Yeah.
But gave indications of what's going on and worked with both sets of parties.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you want to speak to a little bit about how vendor partnerships in your space, how those should be vetted out, or what types of connotations those have for your clients?
No, absolutely. And I think Jeremy hit it right on the head, determining what is their risk profile and really what is their cybersecurity posture look like? Does it align with our own organizations? I think looking at industry specific frameworks, are you compliant with HIPAA, right? For healthcare, if you're looking to do, payment card processing, are you compliant with PCI DSS, which is the security standard for, processing payments, generally speaking. And so I think those are all really important things to be aware of. I think when you're working with small vendors as well, it's also important to note, you can require them to carry insurance. And I know one of the points that may come up is, hey, if we're a relatively new company, we may not have our security standards up to snuff yet. Isn't that going to make it difficult to get insurance? My argument there would be actually absolutely not. There are carrier partners out there that thrive in the small business space for those exact type of clients where, they may be lacking in certain cybersecurity controls. They are able to assist you in improving those. I actually took AIG, for example. They're one of our carrier partners. If you spend $900 or less with them, you get access to countless benefits. They'll give you an incident response plan template that allows you to draft, hey, if there's an incident, how do we respond to it in a timely manner? They'll give you access to a free out-of-band communication site where it's actually called Cygnus that allows you to communicate if your entire network is shut down. You can get your executives in there, do stuff like that. And if you spend over $900 with them, they'll actually do simulated phishing campaigns on your behalf. And I think that's one of the best ways to improve resiliency. If you continue to get tests virtually of fake phishing campaigns, it's coming from inside your organization, but you don't necessarily know if it's a real bad actor or if it's just a test. Over time, it just makes you more resilient because then you err on the side of over-reporting these things, and it can drive much better resiliency. So I think with that said, right, I think when we're looking at these vendors as well, you can make sure, A, they're aligning with your own cybersecurity posture and your own mission, so to say, but you can also try to mitigate some of that risk by requiring them to carry that insurance. And then again, to tie it all together, by doing so, those carriers may be able to, and most likely will, either have free offerings which will improve the security posture, or in a lot of cases, have connections with vendors to give you potential discounts on areas you may be lacking. Because at the end of the day, we all want everybody to be more resilient from a cybersecurity perspective.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I wanted to circle back to the term security posture.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit about risk profile. I assume security posture is perhaps part of a risk profile, or is it a completely separate idea? Maybe they're related. I'm watching Jeremy go, maybe not.
They're similar. The risk posture would be, tolerance for the risk in terms of what things you're going to be willing to let go, what's disposable, so to speak. So like maybe through the choices that you have made in security and other things, you're willing to let one laptop go or one desktop go. You're going to protect the information that's on it. But if that was to go away, that's not the end of the world. You're focusing on the bigger prize of not having your servers ransomwared or other things. And so to me, it's about thinking through those types of choices, but also what's the tolerance for business disruption? So should something really, really bad happen? Well, then what? So for example, if a company gets ransomware and let's say all of their laptops and workstations are now encrypted and they don't have access to them. So they're not going to be able to conduct business. That's unfortunate for them. But the time it takes IT and folks to come through and resolve that and get the business back up and running can be pretty substantial. And there's a lot of details involved here, but understanding the current kind of philosophy from the FBI and others is all of those workstations and laptops are evidence. So your first response for those that are maybe not plugged in is to think, well, I can just go get those ransomware devices and wipe them, reinstall Windows, and be off to the races. Well, now you're tampering with evidence. And so that may or may not be the place you really want to be.
Right.
So then, again, thinking about posture and tolerance. So then if you get to your employees, do you keep 200 desktops in the locker room for
backup?
for the backup for that rainy day?
To start them and update them once a week or so. Somebody's got to do that.
Right. And so that's a whole spectrum of choices. And so it's like any kind of form of insurance, really. It's you're planning for a bad event and you're going to make choices of resources and dollars that you want to put towards how you want to be able to recover from that bad event and what that looks like.
Right. Do you mind defining for our audience the difference between phishing and ransomware?
Phishing is really the act of threat actors trying to get a response from end users, oftentimes to click on a web link on a message or open up an attachment so that they can then do what they want to do. And with ransomware, that is to me the outcome of that activities where a person clicks on a link or downloads a file, runs it, bad things happen. And with ransomware, then oftentimes the devices or one device gets to be encrypted, and but the company doesn't have the decryption keys. The threat actors do, and sometimes they choose to ransom that off and ask for some money, typically in Bitcoin. Sometimes you pay in Bitcoin and they do give you the keys. Sometimes you pay and they don't. And there's still no guarantee that in that scenario, when you're in that place, that you've got them out of your environment. And so I've heard from folks in the industry where things happen, choices get made on payment, not payment, but they didn't really get them fully out of the environment. And there's one company that's in town that got another ransomware event 10 months later.
Yeah.
Because they didn't go thoroughly through stuff enough and kind of made some informed choices and some risk assessments and missed a couple things. And then they got to have a sequel to that show.
So phishing might be the mechanism by which they get the data that they need to do a ransomware.
Yeah.
Or install malware. Is that a different thing?
Ransomware is a form of malware.
Okay.
It's just instead of maybe like spyware would be to spy on them, ransomware is encrypting to gain a ransom back from them.
Yeah. Okay. And to go back to something you were saying earlier, Jeremy, you said sometimes people will pay the ransom and sometimes they don't. Is paying ransom for ransomware something that would be covered by an errors and omissions policy?
So that's a really good question. It wouldn't be the errors and omissions. It would be the cyber portion of the policy. So yes, there is, cyber extortion coverage, and it extends pretty far, actually. Let's say there is that situation where there's a ransomware attack, everything is encrypted, you're unable to do your job, right? In turn, that threat actor is going to say, give me, let's say, $5 million in exchange for access back to your systems. We have seen a significant reduction in payments being made because over the last 5 years, security postures have improved significantly, particularly around backups. Because if you're experiencing a ransomware attack, I would initially make the argument, can you restore from your backups? Because if you're able to do so, you can then run the analysis to see what's going on, and then in turn, ultimately, get your business back up and running quickly. What these threat actors have now done to avoid that is what we call double extortion. So now not only are they shutting down your systems and requiring a ransom, they know you may restore from your backup. They will also try to steal your sensitive data and say, well, great, if you're not going to pay us a ransom for your system access back, we will then require you send us the ransom anyway, or we'll release all of our social security numbers on the dark web, for example, or sensitive claim information.
Okay, so you said you are seeing ransoms being paid out less. You mean less frequently?
Yes.
Got it. Okay.
And again, that's because we will tell our clients, don't pay these ransoms. And again, in certain instances, particularly in healthcare, right, if you have lives on the line, that's a different situation. There's certain situations where maybe it does make sense, but the rule of thumb is to not pay these threat actors, because at the end of the day, we don't want them to persist with these types of attacks. It's only going to egg them on to do more ransomware related attacks or extortion in general. But it's still inevitable, right? So how do we balance that? And for a company, right, it's not only that you're dealing with the ransom payment. You may be experiencing downtime, a loss of client trust, truly losses of revenue or net profit just from being unable to operate. And all of those things are also included within a cyber liability policy to help cover you for all the potential, pitfalls of a cyber attack, including responding to it as well.
Sure. Yeah, loss of client trust is a huge one. That is why we take it incredibly seriously here, because we do have some peers in the industry who have experienced multiple breaches, who have experienced lawsuits due to those breaches. And so we would like to take the posture of saying, we take our relationships with our clients so seriously that we want to have a never, ever has this ever happened stance for our clients, because that trust is there. And we've all experienced it as consumers too, right? Where you see the things in the news and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't even imagine the kind of things I've entrusted to XYZ organization. Who knows where my information is? What am I going to do about that? Let's pivot into our last topic of conversation we wanted to make sure we covered today, because it is so prevalent in our space, is how are self-funded unbundled plans maybe taking their eye off the ball around cybersecurity in ways that we should be doing better. I believe our industry, and when I say our industry, we're talking about technically the risk transfer space for property and casualty in your space. For us, it's in the health insurance space, transfer of risk, mitigation of risk. In that space, I think that we do have a demography of folks that tends to be a little bit lackadaisical around how they approach cybersecurity. So I want us to kind of identify some of those things. If you're working as a vendor or as a consultant in a self-funded plan or a risk transference environment, what do we need to be worried about? Not just today, but maybe in the next 5 to 10 years.
Oh, so many things.
Hire someone as smart as Jeremy.
Yep.
Or Andrew. Yep. Or both. Yeah.
Ask questions fundamentally. Don't just assume that because the series of vendor partnerships that came together or that were presented are the right fit, not just from a business process servicing standpoint, but also from a risk standpoint, whether it be cybersecurity or other risks. Ask questions. Hopefully they've got some third-party audit paper, or they can say they've got some HIPAA compliance. Those types of things are also good. But if not, there's a thing called, Microsoft has a thing called Security Score, which I always describe to people that's a really good low bar, because a lot of companies, if not all, have Microsoft. I mean, not all, there's still Google, but have Microsoft for their email. And so It's a thing that you get with their licensing. And of course, candidly, the ways that you can get that score higher probably involves some licensing and some choices, and some work. But that is a good composite of a lot of things that tell a story, even if they don't have some of these other third-party audit kind of paper certifications. And so it's one of the things that we even talked about on LinkedIn not too long ago, was promoting that as an idea, like, hey, this is a pretty basic thing to ask for.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, your Microsoft score is fantastic after reading your article. And those are the types of things that I think are very important with vendors. We'll sometimes use something called a BitSite score. It's a third party that allows you to scan the external network and basically gives you a credit score equivalent of what's the score of your cybersecurity. And we can use that to see, okay, where are you deficient? Where can we improve? That sort of thing. But I think when we're looking at vendors in general, especially the newer ones, sometimes if their controls aren't up to the snuff necessarily, where can we go from there? And obviously, I think there's really important things to be done. I'd say first and foremost, right, make sure that those vendors are only working in the areas of the network that are required for them. So segment them away from everything important that is not involved in their day-to-day.
Like a low permission risk posture.
Right. And every vendor will be different, right? Some are going to naturally require higher permissions to do certain things. And you may have to take it on a case-by-case basis as well. One thing I found really interesting when working with some of my clients is leveraging just-in-time access or leveraging access for only a specific amount of time. Threat actors love to deploy bad things on holidays, on weekends, times when no one's in front of their desk. So if you're able to limit vendor access to, let's say, working hours only, for example, you are highly mitigating at least a decent number of attacks that could happen, just given the timing of when these hackers tend to go in. So, I think there's always a balance, right, when you're working with vendors. Are they providing enough value to where, when we talked about risk profile and risk tolerance earlier, to Jeremy's point, are there certain things we will let go to the wayside? Maybe there is. And then what can we do as an organization to mitigate their potential exposure to us then in turn, right? So it's a constant battle, unfortunately. But, I think with where security's gone and where I've seen it go over the last 5 years, I'm very hopeful that there will be, stronger security postures overall, even for your, startup type of companies.
Sure. So you said earlier, Jeremy, ask questions. So if I got into a time machine, I went back 5 years, I'm a broker advisor and I'm hiring ClaimTalk and a TPA and a couple other folks to implement my benefit strategy. I don't know anything besides ask questions. Can you give us a couple of examples of questions to ask of our vendor partners? And remember, these are often salespeople talking to salespeople, so we might be very, very low acuity in terms of knowledge.
Sure. I think you can start kind of at the high end and kind of delve down. So you start asking questions like, do you have a cybersecurity program or a risk assessment program? If so,
okay,
let's talk about it. Maybe show me some evidence. Having one in the back of your head, in the back of the napkin, is far different than having that 25-page PDF.
I think that's a really important point that I want to reemphasize. Hearing a salesperson say, yes, I have one, and seeing proof of it are two different things. I would recommend the latter. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, you're spot on. And then delving into that further, because once you see that, you're probably going to see some questions or some things on that maybe are questioning. So, and you can have your IT person with you if you've got one, or you can get one. Just like it's not uncommon to have a person that's a tax professional help you do your taxes. You have an attorney help you do attorney stuff. You can go get a person that's an IT person if that's not something you have in your house already to help advise you on an assessment like that. Those folks are out there. They're virtual CIOs or virtual CISOs are a couple of things you could search on to help get somebody who could advise you through a journey, just to help you understand what the risk is of a thing that you're about to enter into so you can be informed. That's the main spirit of it, is being informed, the good or the bad. And then you can make a choice on what that looks like to you.
I would be curious to hear about what questions you would suggest that a salesperson who's about to engage multiple vendors, and we have no idea what their cybersecurity or what their cyber liability looks like. What are a few just top 10,000-foot questions you would ask, and how would you approach that?
I think as basic as it is, one of the first questions I would ask, I think Jeremy's first questions are what you would start out with, right? Like, do you have a program in general? I would ask two things. Do you have cyber insurance first and foremost? And do you have an incident response plan in the event of a breach? That to me does two things. The first, on the cyber insurance side of things, if you are able to obtain it, that means your security posture is strong enough for somebody to insure it. And just that alone, I think, gives some comfortability, right? Because not only does that not mean they have the controls to be effective, but also if there is an incident, they can have indemnification to financially cover them. On the incident response front, I also will throw in like a business continuity plan as well, for example. What that's really referring to is, let's say an incident happens today. Does any, leader in the space have a plan to respond to an incident today? I mean, based on what he said earlier, he absolutely does. They had an incident come in, they followed the right protocols, and you do that. I see a lot of problems arise when there isn't a plan. And that goes back to my point earlier of sometimes, unfortunately, it takes that first attack to get the gears,
wake up.
Yeah, to wake them up. Because once you have that plan in place, you have a better understanding of, okay, well, how long will I potentially be down for? How quickly could we restore from our backups? If you've never restored from your backups before and there's a problem, you might be down an extra day just because of a hiccup of never practicing that act itself. So the two big things there to me, right? The cyber insurance to vet, do they have the controls and the ability to indemnify us financially, but also the, plans in general, incident response plan, business continuity plan to say when an event happens, can you respond quickly, know how to work with me as, your client here to make sure that we're not experiencing any downtime or minimizing that as much as possible.
Yeah, I had to giggle a little bit when you said if you have to restore from a backup, it might take an extra day simply because you don't even know how to do that. And I think our IT team probably thinks that about me and updates on the computer. I think she doesn't run her updates. She never does it because she doesn't know how to. There's a little pop-up that comes in the bottom right corner. So the last thing I wanted to ask you guys before we wrap up here, what do you think you see in the next 10, 15 years when we're looking at giant market shifts like things such as cyber attacks? Typically, I have the attitude either the market and human behavior will dictate a change, or there's going to have to be legislative government involvement to truly make a change. I tend to think this might be less likely. So what do you see projection-wise 10 to 15 years from now? Do you think collectively as a society we'll just get better at tamping this down and it'll start to wane? Or do we think that the industry and of cyber attack and the money involved in it is just going to make it more and more lucrative? We're going to see it more and more. Do you see growth, stagnation, declination, and why?
I'm more of a glass half empty kind of guy in this space. I feel like the money is a pretty big thing that attracts folks, especially from third world countries, and it's going to continue to evolve until there's no longer a financial benefit.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think the harsh reality is we continue to see cyber in general be more prevalent. I mean, think about 10 years ago, how many folks were working remotely compared to now. I mean, for some companies, they're fully remote. You can't work unless you have an internet connection, a computer, and data to do stuff with, right? So I like to think that, we're always on the defense. I know I brought that up earlier, but, they're always trying to find more creative ways to score and to get their money out. I mean, take the NBA, for example. Even 10 years ago, your Pacers weren't shooting that many threes. Maybe Reggie Miller was, but
Reggie was, yeah.
He was shooting some good threes, but we've seen the NBA shift for that, right? The offense has had to shift because of what the defense was doing, and then vice versa, right? So we're just going to continue to see it. And I do tend to agree with Jeremy where, I want to keep a positive outlook and say, eventually the good guys are going to prevail here, but there is too much incentive at this point. There's too much money on the table for these threat actors not to get creative and find new ways to ultimately exploit the good people here. Because again, to Jeremy's point, it's typically not US-based threat actors doing this. It's typically threat actors from other countries that are trying to get in and attack us here.
Non-domestic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, all the more reason that we need experts like the two of you. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your time. Thanks for traveling to be with us, Andrew. And thanks for your ongoing expertise. Thanks to the IT team for dealing with myself and the other sales folk. If you haven't already, please make sure that you subscribe to ClaimTalk so that you can see all of the episodes as they are released. Go ahead and smash that like button. Make sure you're subscribed, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks for following us.